Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. I'm Zhang Hao, a postdoc fellow at EQ. So today's webinar is on artificial intelligence or AI for short. Okay, it is man-made intelligence. It is not something new. It has evolved over many years. It has come from performing mundane mechanical tasks to showing complex human expressions, such as showing empathy to people. So in Singapore, you can actually see that it actually permeates almost every aspect of our life. So in transport, you can see that there's self-driving vehicles. In healthcare, you can see that they actually help to detect cancers and help doctors to make decisions. In business sector, you see them in frontline customer service, such as making calls, texting, chatting with you, or sending you invitation. So we know that AI can actually help us in many ways and make our lives better. But the question is, how do we manage them when they fail to deliver? Who should be blamed when AI fails? So how do we optimize our interactions with them to actually create favorable conditions for ourselves? So in this webinar, our presenters will try to address all these big questions. Okay, so before we begin our presentation, as usual, I will briefly introduce InCube. So InCube, or Center for Information Integrity and the Internet, is a research center launched in January 2020 at the Wikimi School of Information and Communication. So we are going to celebrate our first year anniversary next year, January, with some interesting events. So do stay tuned. So our research revolves around the internet. They are diverse. We have topics like misinformation, internet, media consumption, privacy, and emerging technologies. So we have a very interdisciplinary team. We have a very competent team of faculty members from Wikimi School, NBS, College of Engineering. So we bring together very different perspectives to the table when we approach a research project together. Okay. So since our launch, we have not only contributed to impactful academic journals, but also to public discourses in the form of news commentaries, public engagement through webinars like this. So for those in Wikimi School and Kohas, I'm sure you have seen them in our quarterly newsletter that we actually send out every quarter of the year. So so for those who have been actually following InCube, right, this is actually our 6th webinar. So we really appreciate your participation, especially to those who have been following us right from the start, from the first webinar. Okay, so thank you very much for your participation, really. Okay, so if you have any inquiries or if you wish to seek any collaborations for your research project, please feel free to email us at this email address, incube@ntu.edu.sg. Okay. Okay, so without further ado, let me get to the main segment for today. So in our first presentation, we will actually look at how, what organizations can do when AI fails. What are the coping strategies to turn around these unfortunate events to ensure business continuity? Okay, so and the second presentation shall actually examine how business can ensure optimal interactions between chatbots and human consumers. Okay, for those people who are familiar with cognitive psychology, this study will actually look at how schemas can play an important role in actually enhancing customers' interaction with chatbots. Okay, so as usual, we will only start our Q&A session after both presentations. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce our first presenter, Assistant Professor Andrew Prahl. Prof.
Okay. Okay, let me just switch this thing here. Okay, thanks everybody. Hope this works. So today we're going to be talking about what I call rogue machines and its relationship to crisis communication, which of course is a large area of study within public relations. We're going to be looking at what happens when AI fails. So let's start off with an awesome slide and make sure that everybody's interested. What is going on here? Some of you definitely remember this. In fact, most of you probably know about it just because you simply read the news. This famous incident where Microsoft designed some sort of Twitter bot that was supposed to be a popular teenage girl and was supposed to learn how to be popular on Twitter. And some bad things started happening, to say the least. Now, on this slide right now, this is actually a bit of a sneak preview into what this paper is all about. There's something going on that's very interesting here that reveals a new type of public relations strategy. By the end of this presentation, I guarantee you, you will be able to spot it. Another thing that's notable about this slide is that it's one of the nicer headlines to come out of this incident. Here's one that's a bit more typical, actually. And this was happening on all of the large tech sites. There's even an article about it in the New York Times. So needless to say, this is not good for Microsoft. And I'm sure if you're working in public relations for Microsoft, waking up and seeing these sort of headlines in the morning is not anything you ever expected to have to deal with. This is really out of nowhere. So I always, oftentimes I'm kind of inspired to do studies based on, my own experience. And, I worked in PR for just about a year, and I was working for a government agency in the United States. And, that meant that most of the time we were just kind of cleaning up for elected officials, human beings. They were just representatives who were trying to make the people happy. So it was fairly straightforward in the sense that sometimes they want something presented in a certain way, and that was our job. And as I started to see, especially over the past 5 years or so, you see AI making mistakes. I constantly would ask myself, what would I have done, 10 years ago if it wasn't an elected official? What if it was some sort of automation or AI that made a mistake? How can we clean up that mess? And another thing that I found fascinating about this is that, if you may know about me, most of my research is quite simple, actually, just kind of humans versus AI sort of research and automation. But this question of how you would do it, how it differs when you're talking about public relations is different, because this is about AI being the face of an organization. And I think that actually that's a lot about what Chen's presentation is going to be about later today. So it ties in quite nicely, right? A chatbot, this is the face of your organization. It's different than just humans versus machines. How does AI represent your organization? So that basically brings us to the rationale for this paper, which is that we need to figure out, how do existing crisis communication frameworks, can they handle the advent of AI, or is there something new here? Are we learning something new about crisis communication? So most of you will know that there's this dominant theory in crisis communication called situational crisis communication theory. Maybe one of the reasons it's dominant is because it can account for seemingly everything. There will be a test later today, of course. Right now, of course, there won't. There will be a test on this actually in my corporate communication class, in case any of my students are here. But needless to say, it covers a lot of different situations. No need to know this. The more important thing to note that within this theory, you might choose one of these strategies primarily based on whether it was intentional. Whatever happened, whatever's causing a crisis, was it intentional from your organization? And was the cause external or internal? Again, you don't have to know what's inside the colored boxes here, but it's critical to understand this notion of external, internal versus unintentional and intentional. So this is really central to the crisis communication theory, and pretty much all the crisis communication theories that are out there, especially this situational crisis communication theory. So causality and intentionality. One of the things we argue in this paper is that AI presents some interesting questions for both of these aspects. Let's think about causality, right? So we think about causality is, did your organization cause this, this thing that's causing the crisis, right? And well, I don't really know. What if it's AI that's doing something? Is it really your company anymore? What if the AI was acting based on the inputs of other users, right? Isn't that the beauty of AI, is that it can personalize recommendations for everybody, that it can make its own autonomous decisions, that it can learn from users, right? So what is the cause anymore? Is it really the company, even if it is their AI? Furthermore, intentionality. well, this is interesting, right? Is it the intention of the company or the intention of the designers, or does AI even have intention? These are like deep questions, right? And we could have an entire 1 hour webinar just on these questions alone. So what did we do in order to start answering these questions? We searched the media from 2015, 2020, 5-year period. And this one is actually the second bullet point here is quite interesting because it was probably the biggest point of battle with the reviewers on this paper. And I think the graduate students in here might find this quite interesting. So you have a problem when you study AI and automation, anything related to this field, is that what is AI, right? So we could, go with the academic definition. We could get out a textbook, or we could find out what other people writing in public relations have said about AI. But we decided, I decided, for the purposes of this paper, we're looking at how the media portrays AI and how the media responds to company responses. So we just said, if the media is labeling something as AI, if it's labeled as AI in the news story, then that's AI. Because from the perspective of public relations, that's what we care about, right? And this was back and forth with reviewers. How can you define AI based on what the media says? What if we defined, I'll never forget this comment, what if we defined other things based on how the media portrays it? This isn't scholarship. And it was really interesting, but this is one of the only times I actually kind of fought with the reviewers. Usually I'm very deferential. But eventually we got it in there, and I think this makes sense. I would love to hear your comments on this later on, but I just thought for the purposes of this, it just matters if the AI is, because that's what the people are thinking who are reading it. It's AI, right? So then we documented company responses, like I said, and media responses, and we ended up with 23 cases total. So this is just kind of like a crash course here in the situational crisis communication theory. One thing they recommend is that you have a low level of responsibility. You might try some of these strategies, like making an excuse or just downplaying it and saying, it's not really that bad. We see this in some instances. This is, I love this crisis for Amazon because it's such an interesting example of responding quickly in a crisis that's caused by this AI thing. So what Amazon came out and said is they said, hey, listen, we're just going to clarify. We're going to kind of distance ourselves a little bit. We never actually used the system, and just let the crisis kind of die down. It worked. Maybe something else would have worked better, but it's interesting to see that those strategies were used. Sometimes if you have perceived to have a moderate level of responsibility, you might try one of these strategies, like bolstering, accepting the fact that you caused something, but saying that, look, our company is also great though, because of all this other stuff. So you kind of try and distract. Or my favorite, the transcendence strategy, which is really hard to do, but basically you accept the crisis, but you try and associate it with like a noble higher goal, trying to say it's worth it. This is a very risky strategy, we found, if you're trying to respond to an AI crisis. And who else would try this than Elon Musk, the sometimes hilarious PR frontman CEO of Tesla and a number of other innovative companies. So check out this attempt here at trying to associate this crash and this death of the driver with a noble higher goal, saying that these things are just inevitably going to happen. But really, it's all in the name of progress. Look at how much better this system is. If it wasn't for accidents like this, then we wouldn't be able to develop the system that will eventually save many lives. This is just a short excerpt here from a media story. If you read Elon's entire statement on this accident, it quite clearly is trying to say that this is all part of something that's much more noble. So it's really a fascinating thing. They got completely blasted in the media for this. This was a terrible PR response. One of the conclusions of our paper is do not try transcendence if you're dealing with AI. So if you're perceived to have a high level of responsibility, you might try some of these strategies, which is you just fully apologize, or you say things like, we're going to change our organization, compensate victims, and simply ask for forgiveness. We actually did not see this happening very often when it came to AI. There was maybe only 1 or 2 instances, and they weren't interesting enough to even put into this presentation. So this does not seem very common. However, we did find a common response strategy that we just could not fit into this existing and any existing crisis communication theory. And it deals with this idea of, is it internal, external? Is it intentional? Is it not intentional? So here's an example of this happening. So Google got in trouble because they had some sort of search engine results about professional hairstyles that could be interpreted as being quite racist. Here's the Twitter user that found this stuff, where they said, look, if you type in unprofessional hair, you get a bunch of people of a certain background, and then professional hair, you get people of a different background, right? So this is the Google, and this was labeled as the Google search AI, right? A lot of people are saying right now, hey, this isn't AI, it's just a search algorithm. Remember, it's if the media is calling it AI, we're assuming it's AI. So look how Google comes out in response to this. They say, it's not us, look, they just kind of take their hand and they point it out at everybody else. It's society's problem. Our engine learns from them, and it learned basically to be racist. Well, now this is interesting because we couldn't really figure out how this would fit into existing crisis communication frameworks. And what's really interesting about this is that it seems to work quite well. If you think about it, the media loves to cover the worst story possible, right? That gets the clicks. So what's a worse story? That your company is awful, or that society and you, the reader, are awful because you're teaching AI to do bad things and to be racist. This takes the focus of the firestorm off the company, off the AI itself, and actually redirects it at the reader, at society in general. This is a huge win from the perspective of a PR professional. I kept on thinking about myself. If I managed to pull this off, I would have been so happy, if I was one of these PR people, because I'd say, well, okay, now it still doesn't look that great for us, but at least the fire is being directed at everybody else. The closest kind of analogy to this in the traditional framework is this idea that companies may find a scapegoat. So they're just trying to point the finger somewhere. However, we couldn't really say that this was what's going on here, because the scapegoat strategy is about finding that identifiable party, right? It's that guy, it's this other company, it's this group of employees. You identify them. But what does it mean to identify society? That's not really an identifiable thing. It's everybody and everything. And then the other thing that's really interesting about this is it's kind of like, this is why we called it the mirror strategy, is because it's making you think about yourself. I mean, honestly, when you hear that Google search engines are learning from users to be racist, it kind of makes you wonder, at some point in my life, did I do something like this? Because we all use Google, right? And like I said earlier, another thing that's fascinating about this is that it plays nicely with this media tendency to sensationalize the worst news they possibly can. Just want to send a shout out here. I seriously doubt that Poon is in this meeting, but he was the person who came up with this idea of having the We Can We Trust group, where we talked about trust in technology. It's now defunct. We don't meet anymore, but we did for the first year that I was here. And it was actually that group in which I came up with the idea for the mirror strategy, because we talked about it in there, because I said, what do I name this, right? And it is notable just to say that I managed to get this into a footnote in the article. That we had some other great suggestions. Just the idea that it's like the Apollo, which is the U.S. space program, where they launch off from Earth and then they point at it from afar. It's not us, it's all of them. And then the puppy dog, oh no, we're victims of the savage society, right? So, but eventually we went with mirror strategy. Sounds more professional. So how does this work out? Like I said, it tends to work out quite well. Let's go back to Tay, where we started this presentation. Check out this media coverage that it turned into. It is your fault, readers, your fault, not Microsoft's, that AI turned into such a jerk. I can see why a writer for a news outlet would love to write this headline rather than something that attacks Microsoft. And so now when we look back upon the slide that I started with, you can kind of see part of this is already there. Microsoft silences its new AI bot after Twitter users, which could very well be you in the audience, taught it to be racist. It wasn't Microsoft's fault. Great evidence of the mirror strategy working out. So thought that was pretty interesting, and that's pretty much most of the paper right there. Would love to hear your questions and comments after this is over. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prof, for your very interesting presentation. Yes, indeed, AI plays such an important role for all the businesses. So, and it is it is equally important to actually manage them when they fail to deliver what is intended. So our next presenter will share with us how we as humans interact with chatbots and how our interactions can be optimized to actually drive business goals. So allow me to introduce our next presenter, Assistant Professor Chen.
Hello, hi, thank you, Zhang Hao. Let me share my screen now. Okay, second. Can you see the full screen on my slides?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this talk. I'm very happy to be here, and it's a great honor to join to give a talk to InCube and audience here. So my name is Chen Lo. I am an assistant professor here at WikimWe. And today I'm also going to talk about something related to AI chatbots. And basically we explicated the use of chatbots in brand communications and how they affect persuasion outcomes. And so this study actually recently has been published in the International Journal of Advertising, along with my amazing co-authors who are also colleagues at NTU, Dr. Hanjin Kang from WikimWe and Dr. Caleb Tse from the Nanyang Business School. So if you are interested, I'm very happy to share a copy with you. Just reach out to me after the talk. And so this study is about the use of chatbots or AI-enabled chatbots in brand communications. And AI-enabled chatbots have been reconstructing consumer experiences, online advertising, and brand communications with its unprecedented efficiency and capabilities. So what is a chatbot or AI chatbot? A chatbot is also called as a talkbot, a bot, or an artificial conversational entity. Is often a computer program that coordinates conversations through auditory or textual methods to stimulate human behavior in the conversations. So chatbots represent the dehumanization of what is human and humanization of technology. That's often the Prahl says. And so AI-powered chatbots can often register a given customer's input and then provide highly personalized feedback or services in real time, and which used to be given by only human employees. You can see some examples right here. Probably most of you have come across chatbots online, or have you ever used chatbots in your online customer service, right? I believe some of you have done this before. And so here are some examples. The one on the left, there's one customer trying to ask for a recommendation from a chatbot, asking for like a recommendation from a sheet mask. And the chatbot basically give him or her very personalized advice based on what the customer has shared with him or with the chatbot. And chatbot says, well, since you mentioned you have dry skin, here are some hydrating sheet masks. And so you can see, yeah, those chatbots have this amazing data assembling capability to register the input from the consumer. And more impressive, and chatbots can also empathize with customers. And here you can see some examples. The chatbot say, well, I'm very sorry. I'm sorry to hear something is not working out. And then also, oh, I'm very sorry to hear that. And sometimes chatbot even say, oh, I'm always here to help you and hope you feel better. And so chatbots have actually developed some sort of empathetic capability or capability to recognize customers' emotion, which is used to be only indicated or exhibited by human employees. And so how the market react to the use of chatbots? The current data shows that the majority of consumers actually they prefer chatbots when handling simple or routine questions. So I don't need to talk to a human as long as a chatbot can solve my problem. And 40% of consumers do not care who delivers the service to them. So as long as my problem is solved, I'm fine. And 80% of business aiming to have AI-enabled automation by the end of this year. And the market for chatbot is expected to reach over 1.2 billion worldwide by 2025. So you can see that the wide application of chatbot and the application is yet to rise worldwide. And well, the general ideas regarding chatbots or our assumptions regarding AI chatbots is that, well, they may be skilled in assembling data and can outperform human service in rendering very fast judgment. But we think that they lack the emotional intelligence that human services have. So even though this assumption may not be true, given that the development in emotion recognition among chatbots, right? You see the example there, but we still hold this assumption or schema toward AI chatbots. And another current debate is on, well, whether we human beings or customers, consumers react to chatbots in the same way that we react to humans. So some studies showing that, well, we do the same to chatbots as we do to humans. There's the different arguments from the computers as social actors, the paradigm. And so the proponents saying, well, we react the same way. But some studies showing that, well, we don't. So these two assumptions or undecided questions basically prompt this study. And so our study, this one is focusing on explicating two defining features of chatbot performance or capabilities. So one dimension is related to cognitive capability. We theorize it as message contingency. So basically it's a capability to register information or input from the customer and then use this information in the subsequent conversation. So it's a cognitive capacity. And another dimension or characteristic of chatbots is the capability to recognize emotion, which is the affective component. So herein we specifically look into their capability to show sympathy. So that's an often used strategy in online brand communication, especially in the customer service scenario. And beyond this, we also want to look into, well, how these two factors play out as a function of the service entity. So meaning that whether this service is provided by a chatbot or a human employee. So simply put, if from a quantitative perspective, if you are an experimentalist, you probably will say, so what's your design? This design is 2 by 2 by 2. You can see from here, 3 IV, 3 factors. The current literature on this topic, the use of chatbots in brand communications, often in the business literature, the realm of business literature, the current literature often looked into factors, that what factors can affect persuasion outcomes. Often they look into the brand attitudes, purchase intentions, and purchases, and so on. So they identified a series of factors pertaining to brand chatbots, including customers' perceived interaction with them, entertainment with them, trendiness, customization, problem solving, ease of use, and so on. And so this study is often used as a survey methodology and other experiments to look into the factors. And another line of research, as I mentioned, they look into how chatbots versus human affect customer services, customer perceptions, and experiences. Among all the persuasion outcomes, we also notice that, well, if we are looking into the performance of chatbots versus humans, there are some fundamental psychological underlying mechanism that can explicate persuasion outcomes. So we use the competence worms typology here. So this is often serves as the underlying mechanism that explicate consumers' reactions. And so competence here is a critical determinant of service quality. So the competence, is service meaning captures one's capability to execute a task, and those who can implement assignments efficiently are deemed as competent and skillful. So it's a cognitive dimension or evaluation of the performance of chatbots or human employees in online brand communications in the case of customer service. And another relevant concept is worms. So worms is more of an affective evaluation of the chatbot versus human's performance. So it captures the perceptions of others' intentions. For instance, those with cooperative intentions are considered warm and friendly. And so we basically are drawing on this typology to hypothesize that this could be a psychological mechanism through which we reach persuasion outcomes. And the theoretical framework we are relying on are mainly focused on this one is called schema activation. So what are schemas? schemas are stored frameworks of cognitive knowledge that organize information about a particular concept, topic, or stimulus, and its relevant attributes and relationships among those attributes. And so, for instance, regarding AI chatbots or AI-enabled artifacts, we often have these schemas of perfect automation. So we think that, however the performance will be, we expect to see perfect accuracy and perfect automation, which is enabled by programming. So we have this schema toward robots or AI chatbots. And on the other hand, regarding human employees, we know they are humans, they're like us. We have these schemas is more associated with imperfection and fallibility of humans and human needs. So we have this pre-existing, deep-seated schemas toward both entities. And not surprisingly, in some literature, Wirtz and colleagues found that human beings tend to have very general aversion toward algorithm or AI, even that they often outperform us in certain situations. And Schmuti explained that, well, our general hostility toward robots or AI occur because of our general bias towards other non-humans or the so-called speciesism. So this basically, we have this pre-existing schemas regarding these two different types of entities. So accordingly, we hypothesize that because we have these different various schemas toward robots or AI chatbots and humans, we will likely to register the expertise and performance of humans. But for chatbots, we are often more likely to discount the expertise or perfect performance conducted or presented by them, because we think it's because of programming, because of AI technology. So accordingly, regarding the identical online customer service received, participants were likely to rate an employee service entity to be more competent and warmer than an AI-enabled chatbot. And then we talk about schema activation. There's another concept called schema congruity. So this refers to the fit between the configuration of attributes associated with an object and the configuration specified by a cognitive schema. So simply put, so if the exhibited attributes by an entity, let's say AI chatbot, is congruent with what we thought about them, then there's a congruity happening. If there's something is beyond what we have expected, then there's incongruity is happening. And so research shows that incongruity sometimes can be more effective than congruity, in which the incongruity can be ostensibly resolved. In other words, so moderate level of incongruity or resolvable incongruity can actually heighten consumer arousal and elaboration, which in turn leads to higher enjoyment or more favorable evaluations than congruity. So let me give you an example. If there's an ad saying like there's all natural soft drink, and versus there's an ad promoting an all natural juice. So then consumers are likely to indicate a more favorable attitude toward the all-natural soft drink. Why that's the case? Because this claim, like putting all-natural attribute with associate this with soft drink, is something incongruent with our schema. And by resolving this incongruity, we feel being rewarded, and accordingly, we're likely to have more favorable attitudes. This has been shown in previous research. So in terms of emotion recognition, right? We talked about emotion recognition and then the role of emotion recognition experiences in consumer reactions. So basically, if customers' emotional experiences with customer service workers are positive, are good, then they're likely to rate the brand and the brand and product more favorably. And so herein we look into sympathy specifically. And so combining this concept and then combining what we have argued related to schema incongruity. So we posit that since chatbots, we have this existing schemas toward AI chatbots, we don't think that they have the capability to recognize interpersonal emotion during conversations. So if an AI chatbot actually showcase their capability to recognize emotion, and then this incongruity or moderate level incongruity will actually lead to better or more favorable attitudes or outcomes, then a chatbot doesn't indicate this capability because there's an incongruity is happening. However, because we consumers often habitually expect human employees to indicate emotion because they are humans, they have the emotional intelligence to do so. So whether a human employee actually indicate or not, there's won't be too surprising to us. So then the effect will be less pronounced. So there will be interaction effect between service entity and the sympathy in the service conversation. And another factor we are going to look into is the cognitive dimension of AI performance is defined as contingency-based interactivity. And interactivity is a very general term. We have learned that a lot of researchers have theorized it as a technological affordance, especially Sanders. He has a classical article on the MAIM model, theorizing this as interactivity as a major technological affordance. But herein, we look into it more like in a message level, message feature. So interactivity residing in the message level is called contingency-based interactivity. So it's defined as an expression of the extent that in a given series of communication exchanges, any third transmission is related to the degree to which previous exchanges refer to, even earlier transmissions. So very long sentences. So simply put, so contingency-based interactivity refer to the capability to register previous input in the conversation and use it in the subsequent conversation or exchanges. And so here, combining what we have argued for the schema, the assumptions related to schema incongruity and our schema toward AI chatbots and human employees, we expect that, well, because we have this perfect automation schema going on related to AI chatbots, so their default capability is to assemble information and to provide very accurate exchanges. And they should be able to have deliver very accurate contingency-based interactivity because they have been programmed this way. So if an AI chatbot actually indicates a high level of contingency in conversations, we won't be so surprised because that's what we have been expecting. However, as humans, like we feel that, well, human beings are likely to err. We have this fallibility of humans schema going on. So if human employees actually deliver very accurate contingency-based interactivity in the conversation, we will be more surprised. So there's an incongruity going on. So we have therefore have this hypothesis regarding the interaction effect between the two. And then what about the three-way interaction? We talked about the three elements, right? Well, we have the, it's plausible to hypothesize that if we combine contingency-based interactivity and emotional recognition in a chatbot communications, so we would like to expect that consumers will be more favorable towards AI chatbots indicating these two capabilities. However, but we are not sure because there's other arguments. For instance, arguments from the theory of uncanny valley. And so they argue that if non-human or non-animate entities exhibit excessive human traits, then people will be likely to consider it eerie or creepy. So we're not sure how this three-way interaction will be look like. So accordingly, we have this research question proposed. And then combining what we have just talked about before, the underlying mechanisms of regarding the competence worms typology, we also argue or expect to see this as a mediating mechanisms. So accordingly, we are asking this research question explicating the mediating role of this typology on the interaction effect between the two on consumer outcomes. And so what we did is first we did some pretest to test some manipulations of contingency and sympathy. We recruited MTurk workers, and these are the information here. So simply put, manipulations were successful. And then here are some stimulus examples. And this in the first study, this is for the first study, we manipulated an exchange scenario. And so you can see we manipulated contingency like this way, this message contingency, and then sympathy in this way, like I'm sorry to hear, I'm here to help. And so that's two main factors manipulated. And then we conducted the first experiment using MTurk workers again. And so the results, I'm going to show you the results directly. So we found that source entity had a significant main effect on competence. So basically, as we expected, participants think human employee to be more competent than chatbot. And then neither sympathy or contingency has showed any significant effects, and none of the two-way interaction worked. But then there was a significant three-way interaction between the three IVs. So we looked further into the three-way interaction by splitting the file into two conditions, like human condition and chatbot conditions. And then we ran some two-way interaction. And then we found that in the chatbot conditions, the two-way interaction between contingency and sympathy was not significant. It was only significant under the human employee conditions. So that's what you can see here. So basically, the interaction shows like this. When the human employees indicated or exhibited sympathy, and the messages with contingency was making the consumers consider the human employee more competent than if the human employee didn't indicate contingency. So that's the interaction. And then we look into the mediating role of the competence. We ran the mediated moderation model using model 7. And so this is the result here. It just to clarify, it's different from moderating mediation. Mediating moderation and moderating mediation, they are two different things. So if you want to look, to find out more, you can definitely talk to me. But we use model 7, so it's mediating moderation here. And yes, under the human conditions, we found that the competence mediated the interaction between sympathy and contingency on the patronage intentions. So meaning their intentions to visit online stores. And so only this mediated moderation happens only under human conditions. And so the discussion here, well, yeah, for most of the hypotheses we found they have been started, like for instance, when the conversation between a customer and a human employee, they consider a human employee more competent than the chatbot. And there is a significant two-way interaction under the human conditions. And well, we submitted this to a journal, and then the reviewer said, well, I want to see another study. Okay, so we conducted another study to replicate this because it's three-way interaction. It's quite, can happen by accident. So we conducted a second study, and we manipulated another scenario with other status check. And also we added another mechanism, worms. In study 1, we didn't really measure worms. We just had mainly focusing on competence. So herein we conducted another one. We also measured believability of the conversation and perceived worms and tested again. So this is a stimuli for a second study. The scenario is different. It's other status and it's different from the first one, slightly different. And then we also manipulate the same thing, contingency and sympathy. And we did a pretest. Where is the pretest? Also, we did a pretest, was working out perfectly. And then we conducted the main study. Sorry. So yeah, we did a pretest and was validated the new manipulations. And then we conducted the main study. Again, we use a prolific platform. We changed the platform from MTurk to prolific. It's a British, I believe it's a European-based platform. And then we replicate the study again. And what we found, largely replicating what we found in study 1. And so for instance, a service entity and sympathy, they had a significant main effects on dependent variables. And the employee, again, human employee was rated more competent, warmer than the chatbot. And also those who indicated sympathy was rated warmer. And the other two IV didn't have any, the other IV, the contingency didn't have any significant effect on dependent variables. And none of the two-way interaction worked, but there was a significant serial interaction, which is what we care about. And we look into the serial interaction again. We look into the human and chatbot conditions. As we have found in study 1, the two interaction between contingency and interactivity, contingency and sympathy was not significant under the chatbot conditions. However, it was significant under the human employee conditions, exactly as what we found in study 1. You can see that when the human employee indicated sympathy or showed expressed sympathy to the afflicted customer, the messages that express or indicate contingency, or the human employee who also indicated contingent-based interactivity was rated more competent than the one who doesn't or who didn't. And we also found that, okay, this interaction was only significant on competence, not on worms. And this is only for competence. You can see is the direction is exactly the same as study 1. The effect size also very similar. So which supports or which showcase the robustness of our findings. And also we first look into the mediated moderation. We look into how this two mediator can mediate the interaction effect between the two on patronage intentions. Again, it largely supported what we found in study 1. So competence mediated the interaction effect between the two on patronage intentions, but not the worms. So that's a result here. And so, yeah, so we replicate this finding in study 1. A human employee rated more competent and warmer, and those who show sympathy was rated warmer. And there is a significant mediating moderation effect going on only under human conditions, not under the chatbot conditions. So theoretical implications, our findings further our understanding of human-based customer service and AI-based customer service and human customer service. And then there's the unsettled debates regarding how human beings react to machine and humans differently. And our argument showing that we indeed interact with non-human agents differently from the way we do with human agents. And this study, we employ the schema and schema incongruity, and there's more to be explored using this as a paradigm. And apparently there's different schemas going on regarding those two entities. And we found the interaction effect between the two, even though there's more question to be explored. And for instance, we only found the interaction or contingency is working only when the customer service also indicated sympathy. So there's something more to be asked and to be explored regarding the interaction between the two. And lastly, we also explore the underlying mechanisms, the worms and competence. And competence is basically trumps the role of worms. So it's meaning that customers are more goal-driven in online customer service scenarios. We don't care. I mean, we care, but eventually it's competence that matters. Practical implications, well, for human employees, yes, indicating or exhibiting both types of capabilities are very important. Offering interactive and sympathetic service will be more critical for human employees. And given the fact that consumers tend to rate human service providers more competently and warmer, and brands probably don't want to replace their human employees with AI completely. Instead, they want to resort to this employees plus AI strategy. That's our recommendation. So I think that's all I have. I think I'm on time, right? So thank you very much for your attention and welcome any questions.
Thank you, Prof, for your interesting presentation. Okay, so we are now open to discussions and questions. Ladies and gentlemen, if you notice that my background changed, it's not because I changed a different background. It's I'm actually in the office of my director, because I'm experiencing some technical difficulties. It's not because he actually handed me the role of director. So ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them down in Oh no, Edson did not transform. Yeah. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them down in the chat box, or you can unmute your microphone.
Hello.
Oh, hello. Hello, Ting Ting.
Hello. Nice to meet you. I actually have a question to Prof. Low. Prof. Low, I'm very impressed by your study, and I have a question because you talked about the theory about schema activation and the schema congruency. I'm just very curious that because schema may change according different times, and different person might have different perception of human beings' performance, and also about chatbots. And maybe with more advanced machine learning and maybe natural language processing, chatbots may be much more warmer than human being, and maybe chatbot can also make more problems. For example, like in Prof. Andrew's case, AI can make racial problems. So I'm curious whether the difference of people can affect the congruency results. And so how do you understand the difference of schema for different participants? And did you control the congruency of different participants in this study? Thank you.
Thank you, Ting Ting. That's a great question. I think, yeah, individual factor may play a role there. Actually, some of the hypotheses in two-way interactions were not supported. So basically, the giveaway is, well, we do have different schemas towards both entities, but regarding the particular schemas regarding of their particular traits, sympathy or other cognitive capacity, maybe the schema that we have toward humans or chatbots may be different, but we don't know. So those specific schemas are yet to be explored. But we know that we have different general schemas, and this schema may be dependent on individual differences. Yeah, this future study can look into that.
Right, maybe conduct some focus group or interview. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ting Ting, for your questions. Okay, I can see that Prof. May is here. Prof. May, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, okay, I'll ask a question, and I think this is kind of a more general question that we as communication scholars, especially I think like Chen, I also do some work in promotional communication. We're always kind of caught in this situation, and it's interesting that AI technology and chatbots, robots, they all offer marketers a way that you can enhance communication in almost a human-like fashion, which means that consumers or customers are going to have a lot more trust, a lot more warm feelings, we often talk about, a brand as aspiring to be your best friend. And there are people who love the brand so much that they actually put tattoos of the brand on their body. They feel so close to it. Is that necessarily a good thing? Because, then on the flip side, and we talk about, this research center, right? Center for Data Integrity, and looking at the work that we're doing now on misinformation and so on. It seems that these types of, fuzzy and warm experiences often makes people more vulnerable. They would be less on guard and more likely to be not skeptical when getting information. So you've got, I feel like there's like these two different huge considerations to weigh. On the one hand, we want to see the bots and so on becoming more human, but on the other hand, we know that people will become much more trusting, and therefore there would be a host of them. So what are your thoughts? This is just kind of a general question, not specific to the particular research that you presented. And Andy, please feel free to jump in too, because just wanted to ask, so sometimes I kind of, when conceptualizing research questions, I find myself kind of going back and forth.
Yeah. And Andy, thank you, May. Andy, you want to say something first?
Oh, well, yeah, sure. I mean, that's such a great question. There's so many aspects of it. I'm actually particularly struck, May, that one of the ways that you kind of introduced your question is to say, is this really a good idea? And that brands are going to go out there, they're going to put AI out there, they're going to put all these things that can personalize content, that people begin to have a deeper relationship with these brands. And that reminds me, actually, so, this is back before I even arrived in Singapore. There was one year it was the year before my final year of graduate school. And I was honestly just looking to get good ideas for my dissertation. So I went on a road trip in the US, and I hit up all the, the big labs that were studying this stuff on the East Coast of the USA. And I passed through Pittsburgh when on my way, and I went to Carnegie Mellon, where they had that really, well-known, human computer interaction institute there. And I was down like in their little labs, and there was just a bunch of graduate students there, and we were just chatting away. And actually, that was the question at that time that we were all chatting about. I actually forget who was there. It was just some random graduate students, but it was this: is it a good idea that brands are going to go towards this? Because we knew it was going to happen, right? Exactly like Chen's research shows. She's got that great intro material there showing how many brands are using AI chatbots, right? And then we saw it in my research. I mean, I was looking at just 5 years, and that was 2015 to 2020. Had I done 2020 to 2021, I probably would have found just as many incidents. That's why, I mean, one of the things I've been thinking about is, well, when can I do a follow-up to this research? How many years do I have to wait? I think it's only maybe a couple of years now. And then after that point, it's going to be every year you can do a follow-up of AI failures. So just on that aspect of the question, is it a good idea? I honestly don't know, but I feel like that's exactly what NTU as a university is trying to explore with the advent of, niched, science and technology for humanity. Look at these ethical questions. It's part of the new core curriculum. And I would love to do more work on that and hear other thoughts on that. But it's a very deep question. Is that all right? I would love to, Chen, what do you think?
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, May. That's a very important question. I think it deserves a large grant or a series of studies on that. So technology is always ahead of policy making and consumer protection and consumer advertising literacy, which is exactly what's happening. So consumers, app developers and brands, they're expecting us to be more trusting and more acceptable to new technologies, and which also will bring value to consumers. So, and we are actually becoming more trusting toward those as they expected. But on the other hand, like you may mention, there's a lot of issues involved, like deception or manipulation, the manipulation in the finest format. So if we couldn't recognize what's going on, like if we're becoming more trusting towards AI and other technology, and then we are more susceptible to potential manipulation and deception. And so I think there should be more updated literacy program and updated regulation regarding disclaimer, disclosure, and it should be enforced. And also this is especially true to other types of AI applications. Like there's a lot of AI advertising going on. It's called AI synthetic advertising, which is happening the same way like AI chatbots. It's very deceptive in nature, and it's very hard to detect, to understand in the first place. So I believe there should be more study to be conducted on this matter. Very important question.
Okay, thank you, Prof, for your reply. So we have one more last question from Ian. His question is in the chat box. So he's asking both Andy and Chen that does human clients resent it more when a human interactor is obviously trained in sympathy tactics rather than actually feeling it? Does that draw more or less is the case of humans or AI? So you have any on this?
Chen, do you have anything on this?
I think that's a very interesting question. I don't know. Maybe we can do some study, right? Are we being more hurt? Like we find out we are being deceived, emotionally deceived by humans or AIs? I have no answer to this.
Yeah,
but
I can, Ian, it's not in the research I presented here, but last year I had my FYP group did a chatbot study. It was driven by a different framework than was the one that Chen presented. We were using advice theoretical frameworks, and I'll just say we spent a lot of time figuring out what we were going to test because it's like a huge theory, and we determined that we could not test something like that. Although we were very interested in that idea of people pushing back and getting angry at the chatbot, we determined we could not do that with this third-person rating where you're looking at a screenshot because, frankly, it's. I mean, at least for my FYP group, I'm like, guys, we've got MTurk participants. They're trying to do it as quickly as they possibly can. You know, looking at screenshots is great for measuring certain things. It's fantastic. It's perhaps is the only way to get an objective measure of what's going on. But something like emotional pushback, we can't measure. But they did look into it. And weirdly enough, I remember they were finding a bunch of stuff like in this one engineering conference called the ROMAN. It's like the Robots and Human Interaction Conference in the IEEE division. They were doing research on this sort of stuff. So I can only say that maybe it's in there somewhere, but it is exactly like Chen said, we have got to look at this, but it's just really hard to do unless you've got people with skin in the game. So I think you really have to be one of the companies that has the chatbot, that has real people interacting with it to really measure that. But that's just the challenge of doing research. It's an awesome idea though, Ian. Let me know if you have ideas. Let's do it.
Well, I would. That's a great answer. Thank you, Andy. I was actually intrigued by Chen's mention of eeriness, as we call in animation, a response to uncanny valley syndrome. If an AI behaves like a human being, at what point does it become completely eerie and intolerable to us? But I am asking literally about the flip side of that is, at what point do people trust an AI more by virtue of the fact, well, we know it's trained to do that, but shouldn't a human being actually be employing sympathy rather than trained sympathy? That's my question, yeah. That's a great answer. Thanks, Andy.
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone. We have come to the end of our webinar. So on behalf of InCube and the presenters, I would like to thank you all for your participation. Yep. So if you have further questions, please feel free to email us. Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Thank you.
Zhang Hao. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, guys. Beautiful.
Thank you,
Take
everyone.
care.
Take care. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. Thank you.
Oh, you were here? I thought you were at home. Typos on my slides. I've been working on my MacBook at home now.